On July 22, 1298, a marshy plain south of Falkirk, 6,000 men stand in perfect circles, their spears pointing outward like the spines of a hedgehog. They are silent, waiting. On the horizon, a dark mass appears. 10,000 English soldiers, 2,500 armored knights, 1,500 longbowmen carrying the most lethal weapon in medieval Europe. Within hours, this field will run red. This is the story of how one tactical mistake condemned an entire army to annihilation, and how the fate of Scotland was decided not by courage, but by arrows. One year earlier, Scotland achieved the impossible. At Stirling Bridge in September 1297, a ragtag force of Scottish rebels caught the English army in a death trap. As English knights funneled across a narrow bridge, Scottish spears cut them down like wheat. It was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare, using terrain, timing, and English arrogance as weapons. The architect of that victory? William Wallace. But victory came at a price. Andrew Moray, Wallace's co-commander, died from wounds sustained in the battle. By March 1298, Wallace stood alone as guardian of Scotland, ruling in the name of a deposed king who would never return. Yet Wallace's power was built on sand. Scotland's nobility, Robert the Bruce, John Comyn, James Stewart, watched him with cold eyes. Some owed loyalty to England. Others saw Wallace as a commoner who'd risen too far. Their support was conditional, their loyalty a question mark. And now the storm was coming. King Edward I of England was not a man who forgave humiliation. They called him the Hammer of the Scots. Tall, battle-hardened, ruthless, Edward had spent decades perfecting the art of conquest. Stirling Bridge had been an embarrassment, a stain that demanded blood. In spring 1298, Edward assembled the largest army he'd ever led into Scotland. 12,000 infantry, 2,500 cavalry, knights in full-plate armor mounted on war horses bred for destruction. And the weapon that would decide the battle, 1,500 Welsh longbowmen. The English longbow could punch through chainmail at 200 yards. A skilled archer could loose 10 arrows per minute, each carrying over 100 pounds of force, flying faster than the eye could follow. Wallace knew what was coming. He had to make a stand. But where Stirling Bridge had given him a narrow bridge to defend, Falkirk offered only open ground. No choke points, no terrain advantages, just a flat killing field. Wallace would have to rely on something else, the schiltron. Wallace's army numbered 6,000 infantry, common men armed with 12-foot spears. He arranged them into 4 massive circular formations called schiltrons. Imagine a human fortress. Hundreds of men packed shoulder to shoulder in concentric rings, spears angled outward in every direction. When properly formed, a schiltron was nearly impenetrable to cavalry. Horses wouldn't charge into a wall of steel. Knights couldn't break through. At Stirling Bridge, it had been devastating. Behind the schiltrons, Wallace placed 500 archers, poorly equipped compared to their English counterparts. At the rear, 1,000 light cavalry, mostly nobles whose loyalty was questionable. But here's where the mystery begins. Wallace positioned his archers outside the protective walls of the schiltrons, exposed and vulnerable. His cavalry would soon make a decision so catastrophic it defies explanation. On the morning of July 22nd, the two armies faced each other across the marshy plain. The Scots stood silent, spears planted in the earth. They had no idea what was about to happen. The English cavalry attacked first. Waves of armored knights thundered across the field. On the Scottish left flank, the Scottish cavalry made their move, and it was disastrous. Instead of harassing the English flanks or retreating behind the schiltrons, they charged headlong into Edward's heavy cavalry. It was suicide. The Scottish horsemen were outnumbered 3-1, wearing lighter armor, riding smaller horses. The clash was brief and brutal. Scottish riders were unhorsed, trampled, cut down. Those who survived fled into the woods. William Wallace stayed behind his infantry. He didn't ride to their aid. He didn't rally them. Why? Sources give us no answer. Did Wallace underestimate the threat? Did the cavalry act without orders? Was this incompetence or desperation? We'll never know. Only the result matters. In minutes, Wallace's cavalry was destroyed. The English knights then turned on the exposed Scottish archers. Without cavalry support, without the schiltrons' protection, they were defenseless. English knights rode them down mercilessly. In less than an hour, Wallace had lost both his cavalry and his archers, before the real battle had even begun. Now the English cavalry turned to the schiltrons themselves. Thousands of pounds of armored horseflesh slammed into walls of Scottish steel. Horses screamed as spears punched through their chests. Knights were thrown from saddles, crushed beneath their mounts, or impaled trying to break through. Some penetrated the outer rings, but not enough. The schiltrons held. For a moment, Wallace's gamble seemed to be working. Against cavalry alone, disciplined infantry could survive. The circular formations bristled with steel, an unbreakable wall. But Edward I was watching from his command position. And Edward understood something Wallace had overlooked. The schiltron had a fatal weakness. Edward pulled his cavalry back and gave a simple order: bring forward the longbowmen. What happened next changed the face of medieval warfare. 1,500 Welsh longbowmen advanced to within 200 yards of the Scottish lines. They knocked their arrows, drew back, released. The sky went black. Thousands of arrows arced through the air and fell like a steel rain. The Scots, packed tightly into their formations with minimal armor and no shields, had nowhere to run. Men fell by the hundreds, arrows piercing through flesh, bone, and mail. A practiced longbowman could fire 10 arrows per minute. That meant every 60 seconds, 15,000 arrows slammed into the Scottish ranks. The sound was deafening. A continuous whisper roar of shafts cutting through air, the wet thud of impacts, screams of dying men. There was no defense, no counterattack, just death from above. The schiltrons began to disintegrate. Men at the front collapsed, creating gaps. Those behind tried to close ranks, but the arrows kept coming. Each volley thinned the formations further. Each minute brought fresh carnage. Wallace's great defensive strategy, the impenetrable schiltron, was being methodically destroyed from a distance. The very thing that made the formation strong against cavalry, its density, its immobility, made it a perfect target for archers. And there was nothing Wallace could do but watch his army die. When the arrow storm finally ceased, the schiltrons were shattered. Gaps yawned in every formation. Thousands lay dead or dying. The survivors, exhausted, wounded, traumatized, could barely lift their spears. Edward sent his cavalry forward again. This time, they didn't charge a solid wall. They charged gaps, weak points, openings. The English knights smashed through the depleted Scottish ranks like a hammer through glass. It wasn't combat anymore. It was butchery. Then came the English infantry, thousands of spearmen who poured forward to finish the job. The Scots, surrounded on all sides, fought like cornered animals. Some died standing, spears in hand. Others broke and ran, hunted down in the chaos. The field became a slaughterhouse. Somehow, in the confusion, William Wallace escaped. How, we don't know. Perhaps loyal followers created a diversion. Perhaps he slipped away during the chaos. Either way, the Guardian of Scotland vanished as his army was annihilated. Scottish losses, thousands dead. English losses, around 1,000. Edward had won decisively. Scotland seemed finished. But Scotland's story was far from over. Falkirk ended Wallace's career as a commander, but not as a symbol. He became a ghost, a guerrilla fighter striking from the shadows. For 7 more years, he evaded capture until 1305, when he was betrayed and dragged to London in chains. There, he was executed with horrifying brutality. But his death didn't end the resistance. It ignited it. 9 years later, at Bannockburn, Robert the Bruce would face another English army, and this time Scotland would win. Falkirk taught a brutal lesson. Courage isn't enough. You need strategy, adaptability. Leaders who know that war isn't just about standing your ground. It's about knowing when to stand and when to move. William Wallace stood his ground at Falkirk. The field still remembers. Falkirk was just one battle in Scotland's brutal fight for freedom. But there are dozens of stories like this, forgotten battles that changed the course of history. Tactical masterstrokes, devastating defeats, moments where everything hung in the balance. If you want to see more cinematic deep dives into history's most brutal and pivotal battles, hit that subscribe button right now. Seriously, do it. We're just getting started. Smash the like button if this story gripped you, and drop a comment telling me which battle you want covered next. Bannockburn? Agincourt? Thermopylae? You decide.